What if I told you that you're currently blind to nearly 90% of the reality happening around you and right in front of your eyes? Not because you've got poor vision, because your eyes aren't working properly, but because your brain is a world-class editor. In my research in consciousness and metaphysical science, I have explored a startling truth. Our mind or psyche is not a single unified field like our consciousness is, but it's a set of compartments that refuse to speak to one another. We literally delete what doesn't fit into our belief systems. So today I'm going to look at the psychological blindfolds that keep us trapped in this 3D bubble. In today's video, we'll explore why we miss precious things in front of us and how we can begin to tune our biology to perceive transdimensional phenomena in our world around us, the stuff that's already here. So let's begin and look at the mechanics of why we miss the magic. The modular brain, that I like to refer to it as, a box within a box in a box. So to understand why we miss so much of our world, we have to look at the architecture of our mind. So let's look at the field of evolutionary psychology, where there is a core concept that our mind isn't a single unified command center or field like our consciousness is. Instead, evolutionary psychologist Robert Kurzban describes the brain as a modular multitasking problem-solving organ with no single unified sense of self. Think of it like a collection of distinct interacting modules that are often at odds with each other and not interacting with each other at all. Skeptic and science writer Michael Shermer has also said that we have a modular brain that leads us to deny and distort evidence. Because these modules are compartmentalized, acting like separate entities, we can hold conflicting beliefs or ideas about something without even realizing it. And this separation is a psychological defense mechanism where our thoughts and our feelings that seem to conflict with each other are kept isolated. If our consciousness were fully integrated, we wouldn't be surprised by things like trans-dimensional phenomena or telepathic messages or flashes of UFOs. But because we are compartmentalized in our minds, we only see one part of our awareness, which is typically accessed at a time. Let's talk about the invisible gorilla experiment. And it's a famous experiment that gives this video its name, actually. And it was conducted by Nobel Peace Prize winning psychologists Christopher Chabry and Daniel Simons. This invisible gorilla experiment is a startling look at the limits of our attention. In the study, students were asked to watch a video of people passing a basketball to one another. One group in the team wore white t-shirts and the other group wore black. The students were given a specific task: count the number of passes made by the team in white. Right in the middle of the game, though, a person dressed in a full gorilla suit starts walking into the centre of the court, beats their chest and walks off. Now, you would think that's impossible to miss, but half the students failed to see the gorilla entirely. It was as if the gorilla was invisible. This experiment revealed two critical things. The first, that we lose a massive amount of what's happening around us, and the second, that we have no idea at all that we are missing it. This is called selective perception, where your brain isn't just a passive receiver, it's an active, very active filter. And in a study by psychologists Andrew Schultzman and Joshua Vassarel, it was found that we process information that contradicts our beliefs much more slowly and less accurately. They say that we draw self-serving conclusions because our minds are wired to support our existing idea of reality. Social psychologist Jiva Kunda calls this motivated reasoning, and that's the tendency to find arguments for what we want to believe in much stronger than the arguments we can find for what we don't believe in. If we can miss a gorilla in a basketball game, imagine what else we are missing in our wider environment and in our day-to-day life. This is perfectly illustrated by the invisible ships phenomenon, which is perhaps the most powerful anecdote or example of the selective perception idea. Historically, this report comes from the 1770 journals of Sir Joseph Banks during Captain Cook's landing in Australia. It was observed that the local population didn't see the massive tall ships that were anchored in the bay because they were so far outside of their existing reality constructs that they couldn't see them. Instead, all they could see was small rowing boats bringing the explorers to shore. But the massive ships anchored out there at sea, they didn't register at all in their minds. Why? Because there was no reality idea or perception constructed for them in their consciousness for a tall ship. It was so far out of their experiences that their brains had no language to translate the visual data into a known object. In metaphysical retellings of this story, it's often said that it was only the shamans in this community who were trained to move in between the ordinary and non-ordinary states of consciousness that could eventually perceive the ships. And once the shamans had described to the other community what they saw, the community's blindfold was removed. Today, I would say we're in a similar position, whether we're talking about ET contact or our connection with the source of all that is, or we're talking about our latent supernatural abilities, our siddhis. I would say that these realities are often still invisible to us because we haven't yet built a reality construct to perceive them, accept them, or anchor them fully into our current version or picture of reality. We're still counting the basketball passes actually in that basketball court, while the trans-dimensional ships are already anchored in our harbour. Or maybe it is that we sense that things are more than what they seem, but to actually acknowledge this, or to acknowledge them, is to question absolutely everything in our life. And that could potentially lead to a full-blown deconstruction of our life as we know it. And that can be scary. So we let our minds conveniently keep suppressing and invalidating. So how can we tune our nervous system and our consciousness for this integration? How do we stop the deletion? Well, author Gabor Mate and author Mary Rodwell suggest that many people we label as neurodivergent, those with ADHD or on the autistic spectrum, are always dialed into higher dimensions. They have strong dissociative tendencies which enable them to stay connected to their full multidimensional nature. But for the rest of us, the neurotypicals, it requires more than just a passing interest. It requires the right tools and a clear intention to calibrate our 3D minds, our compartmentalized minds, to integrate every hidden corner of our consciousness. Think of it through the lens of psychologist Dr. Radulovich, who uses a brilliant radio analogy to explain how our brains store and retrieve information. She says that in our normal everyday life, our brains are tuned to an FM frequency to access our standard memories and our logic. However, when we encounter something outside of the norm, outside of our 3D notion of our world, like a trans-dimensional event or a deep subconscious memory, that data is stored in a completely different band, the AM frequency band. Okay, so it's just an example or a metaphor. But because these frequencies don't overlap, we often lose or suppress our most profound experiences because we simply aren't tuned to the right station to remember them. This is why we use practices and exercises that can bring coherence to the body and allow our nervous system to calm and the energy body to realign, to create that space to allow us to integrate. Allowing the consciousness to dwell in the present moment effectively can shift our internal dial to that AM frequency. And this is where trans-dimensional perception lives. By mastering coherence or this kind of calibration, we stop being linear beings trapped in a single limited frequency and finally step into our true nature as dimensional beings living in the realm of infinite possibility and infinite manifestation. The credibility of the idea of the shaman, which has existed across time and across the globe for millennia, rests on the fact that shamanism is one of the most ancient and widely practiced trans-dimensional experiences. And it has these methods that remain remarkably consistent across diverse cultures from China to Celtic Europe and to South America. Rather than being rogues or charlatans, anthropologist Elkin A.P. Elkin describes these practitioners as men of high caliber or high degree. And indeed, it would signify that they've earned their respect because they've had this rigorous discipline, this rigorous mental training, and they have courage and they have perseverance. Their credibility, I would say, is further bolstered by the fact that they have this specialised knowledge of the human mind and its influence on both their own body and on other people's bodies and minds. Unlike the typical compartmentalised human mind and consciousness, shamans move trans-dimensionally, fluidly, at will, maintaining this learned awareness while travelling through altered states such as trance or dream states. A shaman's primary value to their community is their ability to anchor that information that they have. They can retrieve it and they can put this information down from non-ordinary into real normal waking consciousness for a real guidance. For instance, they can enter into the lower world to recover a patient's power animal, and then they can return with specific instructions for healing. Shamans, they don't just hallucinate for the hell of it. They're being cognitive in other dimensions, harnessing power and retrieving information. This fluidity allows for a whole new way of seeing the universe while maintaining ancient familiarity with ancestors, with spiritual territories. High-capacity individuals who can tune out of 3D reality, there's a trait often labelled as neurodivergence today, have been historically valued as shamans because they possess intrinsic survival value as seekers, inventors, thought leaders and prophets. And an interesting fact here that I discovered with my research is that modern research has noted amazing similarities between these ancient shamanic ritualistic initiations and contemporary UFO abduction stories, suggesting that shamanic or the shamanic path is a timeless method for processing extraordinary encounters. Ultimately, I would say the shaman represents a holistic human, an integrated one. And by following this path, one moves from being linear to being multidimensional, capable of integrating all compartments of the consciousness and utilizing the full range of human perception to heal and evolve. So when we integrate our compartmentalized consciousness, we move towards what a psychologist, Kenneth Ring, calls the imaginal realm, where we stop being incarcerated in this doomed prison of historical time and start living in what he calls mythic time. We become, as he beautifully puts it, diaphanous beings of light. If you want to know more about my work, please reach out. The ships are in the harbour, I'd say. It's time we all learnt to see them, to decompartmentalise our consciousness. Thank you for listening. I'm Gail Thomas.